Hey, it's Wabbit. I do hope this finds you well. Warning, this is going to be a talking only video. And if you are never going to use any kind of mobile device with the MPC sample, this is a great opportunity to click away. You will not get any value from this. I'm going to break this down into two chapters. The first part is me just kind of doing some disclaimer stuff. And then the second part, I'll get into the topic of this video. I have no idea what I want to title this video as I record this. I want this to be informative and an opportunity for improvement. I'll come back to that later in the video. I do not, and I need to repeat this, do not want this to come across as hating on the device or any device. We don't do that around here anymore. I did that before. I don't find any value. I personally don't believe there's anything such thing as bad gear, but I digress. I also need to say that I am not a subject matter expert in how hardware is built or electronics. Nothing under the hood. I say this because someone, as a former ER nurse back in the day, the 90s, we would have people come in and they had this thing called WebMD, and suddenly they were doctors, and it was annoying as you know what. Now I'm going to give some things, their observations, their opinions. They are using what I call broken AI. As much as I like AI, I think it's horrible for what I'm going to be talking about. So I'm treading very carefully. So those are just some of the basic disclaimers. And I'm going to present, what I'm talking about, but then also, what I'm going to do in terms of, making adjustments accordingly. I think that's an important two words. All right, let's get into it. So at the heart of this is really power management. And before I talk about this device, it has to do with when I plug the sample into a mobile device, and this is going to be charging off of this device at all times. That's what I'm understanding here on March 28th of 2026. And I say that because when you watch this video, maybe all this stuff is void. So please keep that in mind as you watch the video. All right. Now, from there, I'm kind of approaching this like you would do maybe in debate class or in a courtroom. I want to present my case to say that there are actual practices going on in the real world where this is a thing. I could sit here and say it would be nice if this would just charge off the battery, do a setting, and that's theory talk. When you can present that, wait a minute, there's something out there that is doing what I feel should be best practice. So here is the Roland S1. And I also think, this is a little side note, Roland takes a lot of slack, and maybe deservedly so. It's all our opinion. But this is one thing they got right. And I'll have to put in post what year this was released, because I think this is also another important point. This isn't something that's just new. This device came out March 2026. When this came out, this had this. This wasn't an update. This was baked in day one. So this also is a device that has an internal battery. I'm not saying they're the same, but at a high level, I can turn this thing on and pop in some headphones. Nothing is connected. It's got it's not battery powered. You don't put AA batteries in. It actually has a internal battery, and you're off to the races. Okay, now let's say I want to connect to this device. So I'm going to take my USB-C cable, and I'm going to lay this down here. When I plug this in, I want you to watch there. You're going to see this light pop on. What this says here is charge. So I can then come in here. I'm using this app called AUM, and I can tap on this. Actually, need to power it on first. Sorry. So same thing outside of the light there. And we've got the MIDI showing up here in that table. And then when I click on the audio track, I've got my inputs for the audio and the outputs for the audio as well too. So essentially what's going on is, my audio, this is a class compliant device. My audio and MIDI is going over this cable. And then also power is going over this cable. So that's good and well. The issue is, let's say I start doing a long jam, or maybe I forget to fully charge this. This over time is going to draw power off of this because this is being charged. Now, the specs on that, I don't know. So let's go ahead and show you then, when I turn this off, why I feel this should be best practice. So this applies to all of the other, there's a total of 5 ARIA compacts at the time of the recording of this video. Now the E4, I think, is a different button combination. I had the P6 and I sold it, but I think it also has exit here. But if you hold this button down here, turn the power on, starts up, everything looks the same, but watch what happens when I plug in the USB cable. That light doesn't pop on. Essentially what's happening, this is now running off of its internal battery. It's not drawing power off of the iPad. And I can go back into AUM. I can click on the MIDI table. I still see that there, and I still see the same inputs and output options here. Now, this is where I am going to, forewarn, I could be completely wrong, but I'm going to just, put on my WebMD hat. At a high level, I'm still getting audio and MIDI over the same cable, but something was done by Roland in the setup of this hardware that when I did this button combination, it said, don't draw power from here, switch to the internal battery. That's as far as I'm going to go. So that's why I present this use case to you, that this is actually a real thing. This is something that's being done. And I urge that this be a best practice. All right, so let's take this out of the scene. And again, on its own, like the S1, this thing can turn on. Now, I've got this little battery indicator here. We'll come back to that a little bit later on. And again, on its own, I do my little thing, jam, good to go. Now, let's say I want to hook up this device because if you've been paying attention to like the leaks before this thing came out, if you've been watching Andy Mack's presentation, and then just others, people will want to get samples off of this. I'm going to be using this. This is my virtual crate digging. I don't own any LP. So we'll take the same cable, and what I want you to notice on here now is you now have this little charging indicator, similar to the S1, just a different color. And this is the part that I believe should be the informative part for you, because again, I'm not hearing or seeing much talk about this. And again, it's just really to be informed. So what's going on right now? This is actually drawing power off of the iPad. And over time, same thing as with the S1. Now, I don't know the specs. Is this going to draw faster? I don't have that information. But that's what's occurring. And what's going to be the issue is if I'm not aware, again, same thing with the S1, if I've got something that's not charged fully and I'm relying upon this, I'm going to run this down. And I just think it's important to be aware. Now, the unknowns here. The manual just basically talks about the different colors for the battery icon, and I'll put that up in post what they are. But let's say that this is fully charged. Are we now in a trickle state? I don't know that. And that's, again, when I reach out to Akai through customer support, I'm hoping to get that answer. Is that the case? All right. So here is where we've got two, or I should say, these are the two things that I'm looking at. The one is I'm hopeful that this can be fixed with a firmware update. Now, what I did is I actually went back and I took a look at some of the videos where Andy Mack was doing his demonstrations, and I was hoping there was a bit of an Easter egg. And I went to the spot where he had a phone plugged up, and unfortunately, I'm still seeing the same icon here. So I thought maybe he was working on a different firmware where that was off, but that's not the case. So that was out the water. And then I saw somebody mention the name Jazz Cats, who I didn't know who this person was. Come to find out, they're on Facebook. They took this device apart. They have a photo, and I don't know if it's the front or back. And what was interesting, someone made a comment asking, is this the same PC board as the older devices? Now, again, I don't know who Jazz Cat is. I'm guessing doesn't work for Akai. His response was no. And again, this is where I need to be very careful. I don't like getting into this, these dark alleys where people who don't work for a company are making these statements. And when I read this, I thought, oh, okay, maybe that leads to a possibility where, again, I go back to my broken AI research, in that if the hardware is set up in a way that they could release a software update to turn on or turn off this feature, then maybe, that kind of gives me some hope that that could be the case. But again, I don't know that. AI is telling me this, and I'm not really confident when it comes to that kind of AI research. I'm not willing to put all my eggs in that basket. So option one is that Akai is able to put out a firmware update that allows some kind of functionality, whether it's in the settings or some kind of button combination, that you put this in battery charge or battery operation when you have it hooked up to something like this. Then the other option is, nope, this is hardware baked, because AI also said, and again, take that with a grain of salt, that Akai has not been known to put out updates relating to power management. Now, again, I don't know the history of Akai, and I'd be completely wrong on that. So again, I'm treading very carefully on that. But again, I'm just trying to look for something to give me some kind of a inclination of what may be coming. But that's a possibility too, and I don't know if Akai is going to say anything. My expectation is I'm not going to get any kind of answer that will answer the question for me. I could be wrong. So what do? That's where I need to basically plan accordingly. Now that I know what's going on here, I can say, okay, I need to make note of what my battery percentage is here. And if I know I'm going to be doing a long session, I get this thing charged up. Pretty simple. The other option is, okay, I'll just bring some external power. I've got a Magic Keyboard that has another port on the side. I can just put a battery bank, boom, problem solved, no issues. Better yet, just plug it into the wall. I'm not always going to be, out in the field with this device. So if I'm going to do a long virtual crate dig, I also like watching live streams and grabbing samples and messing around. Then I'll plug in, issue resolved, no worries. Here's the other thing. I don't have to go to USB-C. And some of you have probably already thought that. There's other ways to get audio in here. Now, that requires me to then, hook this up to an interface, but guess what? I've got one, and I'm okay with that. So I don't have to rely on this method to get audio into here. And that completely bypasses this. And again, it's no longer an issue. So despite everything I said, and that's why I didn't want this to come across as this thing sucks, or I didn't know this, I got to return it. No, this does not diminish this device at all. Because I go back to what I said earlier. Go back and watch Andy Mack's presentation. 90 to 95% is this alone. He only brings out the phone for maybe a minute. I'm being sarcastic there. However, the reality is you and I are going to be putting things on this. The reality is many people will be using a mobile device. It's 2026. That's going to happen. And that's why I present this in an informative way, because it's not being talked about that I've seen. And now you understand at the time of this recording that this is what's going on. And then you can plan accordingly and still have a good experience. And then the other part, as I said, while I'm going to go with option number 2, Akai has this hard bake. It's not going to happen. It is what it is. Go out there and jam, make your music, get your beats on, have fun, whatever you want to do. But this is the way it's going to be. Cool. I accept that. Then my message is to other developers out there. I presented my use case of what I consider best practice. Roland understood that. When this thing came out, day one, this feature that I showed you was on there. So if Roland got this in the year that this thing was released, then others who make devices that have this scenario, if it can be done, because think about it, this thing is, and I get it, this may have a smaller battery, I understand that, but when you look at it from the optics, this thing is smaller than this, and yet it can do that. And that's why I say this is an opportunity for improvement. This is an opportunity to provide best practice to the customer that they can have these operate independently. And again, I can still get that class compliant. So that's my presentation. And I hope this was something that was informative to help you out. And if you have this device, you already know this thing is fun. Yes, there are a few that probably don't like it. That's the case for everything. You can't please everybody. That's not anybody's job. But when you understand how things are working, I don't even call it a limitation because I presented different ways. I mean, I'm serious. This whole audio in, I know somebody has already gotten to this point like, bro, I'm a step ahead of you. I don't even need to do that. But when you understand everything, and I'm crossing my fingers that I get something back from Akai that said, even if they say, hey, I would love if they said, nope, sorry, Wabbit, that's the way it is. I'm good with that. Then I can stop, searching for things or, going back to JazzCat's page to see what, he finds out. And I'm cool with that. Or maybe we get a little Arturia microfreak treat. You know what I'm talking about. Remember when they did that update and the whole headphone vocoder? And again, I got guilty. I can't remember. There was another device where I can't remember what it was, but I remember referring back to that and like, well, if they do that, then and that's where I get into trouble. So, yeah, that's all I got. I'm loving this device, by the way. I'm having a blast, but I'm having a blast with all my toys. So get out there, have fun. Thank you for your time. I hope you're well, and I hope to catch you in another video. Until then, you know the drill. Keep jamming.